You know what's strange? We talk endlessly about boomers and millennials. We dissect Gen X like they're some kind of forgotten middle child. But there's this entire generation that everyone thinks they understand, yet somehow gets completely wrong. Generation Z, born roughly between 1997 and 2012. They're your youngest coworkers who show up to meetings with opinions already formed. Your kids, who can't make eye contact but can build a following of 10,000 strangers before breakfast. The people who inherited a burning world and decided to feel every single degree of it. And here's what nobody tells you. Their psychology is probably the most contradictory of any living generation. They are, without question, the most diverse generation in American history. Racially, culturally, sexually, ideologically. Studies from Pew Research show that Gen Z is on track to be the most racially and ethnically diverse adult generation the country has ever seen. They grew up in classrooms that actually looked like the world outside. They normalized conversations about identity that previous generations couldn't even name. That's not nothing. That matters. And they are genuinely, almost frighteningly, tech-savvy. Not in the way millennials are tech-savvy, where they remember learning to use the internet. Gen Z is the internet. They don't use the algorithm. They are the algorithm. A 16-year-old in a bedroom in Ohio can build a brand, launch a product, and develop a global audience before their parents figure out what a TikTok even is. They understand digital systems intuitively, the way Gen X understood a carburetor or a card catalog. It's native intelligence, just applied to an entirely different machine. But here's where it gets complicated. Gen Z were the first generation to grow up entirely inside social media. Not just with it nearby, inside it. Their developmental years, the years when your brain is literally still forming, happened on platforms designed by engineers to maximize engagement through emotional response. Every post, every comment, every follower count, wired into the developing adolescent brain like a feedback loop that never turns off. A study published in JAMA Pediatrics found that adolescents who spent more than 3 hours daily on social media had significantly higher rates of anxiety and depression. And Gen Z didn't just use social media for 3 hours. For many of them, it was the primary environment where social life happened, where identity was tested, where belonging was granted or withheld in real time, publicly, with a number attached to it. So yes, they are more emotionally expressive than any generation before them. And the clinical data backs that up. Rates of diagnosed anxiety and depression among Gen Z are higher than any previously recorded generational cohort. Some researchers argue this is because they're more willing to seek diagnosis and talk about it openly, which is itself a form of strength. That's a fair point, but the numbers are still striking. Something is different here. Not just in how they talk about mental health, but in how they're actually experiencing the world. They grew up watching the climate crisis accelerate in real time. They were teenagers during school shootings that happened so regularly they became a kind of background noise. They came of age during a global pandemic that canceled the milestones that are supposed to mark the transition into adulthood. Prom, graduation, the first real job, gone, or weird, or zoomed in from a childhood bedroom. What do you do with that? What does your nervous system do when the world keeps confirming that the floor is actually not that stable? You feel it, loudly, publicly, because that's what the environment trained you to do. Gen Z developed a social consciousness that is both their greatest strength and, at times, their greatest liability. They are more inclusive, more aware of systemic inequality, more likely to call out injustice than any generation before them. That awareness came from real places, real pain, real history finally being told accurately. That's not weakness, that's progress. But the same emotional intensity that makes them powerful advocates can make them fragile in environments that require compartmentalization. They struggle, more than previous generations, with the idea that someone can be wrong without being evil, that conflict can exist without someone needing to be destroyed, that nuance is not the same as complicity. Gen X dealt with a cold, indifferent world by building armor. They learned early that feelings were a private matter, processed alone in an empty house. Gen Z dealt with a hot, overwhelming world by externalizing everything. Every emotion, narrated, documented, validated, or rejected by an audience. The result is a generation that is extraordinarily connected and simultaneously more lonely than any before them. There's this weird paradox at the core of Gen Z psychology. They want to be seen more than any generation in history. But being seen has never been more dangerous, more quantified, more weaponizable. They built their identities in public, which means their wounds are public too. They're not soft because they're weak. They're exposed because the world they grew up in gave them no walls. The truth is, Generation Z might be the most honestly human generation we've ever produced. They refuse to pretend. They won't perform stability they don't feel. They won't work 60 hours a week for a company that will lay them off without blinking. Not because they're lazy, but because they watched millennials do exactly that and get nothing for it. They've seen the contract, they've read the fine print, and they're renegotiating. They're not the future. They're already here, doing the work, feeling all of it, and somehow still showing up. And maybe that's the most Gen Z thing of all. Caring almost too much, even when it costs them. Even when nobody asked them to. If this hit home for you, please subscribe. And if you want to support these deep dives, hit that join button to become a channel member. I would genuinely appreciate it.